Chapter 35, Surprise Disclaimer. Surprising Mr. Black is a bad idea. Bad things happen to people that surprise Mr. Black. Surprise. Welcome back, the professor smiled. I trust you had a good time. How's the child? We had a good time, Harry nodded. And the child is fine. They even made me a godfather. Congratulations, the professor smiled. If you don't mind, I was hoping to make a quick stop on the island so that you can put up a few wards, and after that, well, you see, it's like this. Hench Gerald, the professor and I have a conference we'd like to attend in America. Hench Gerald spoke up. So we'll have to hurry if we want to get there on time, so we won't be able to make many stops between here and the United States. The professor smiled nervously. Okay, Harry nodded. I have to be in England in a few days, so I don't mind us hurrying a bit. When do you have to be in the United States? I was hoping to be there in the next 24 hours. The professor shrugged. It's not a very long conference, at least not the part we're interested in. Sure, Harry nodded. Will we be able to make it to England in the next few days? Certainly. The professor nodded. Why? Because there's something in Sweden that I'd like to do in 3 days, and I have to be back in England for something long term after that. Harry shrugged. Sorry to spring this on you. Quite all right, the professor waved it off. Hench Gerald, full speed ahead. Why are you telling me that? Hench Gerald glared. You're the one hogging the controls again. Silence, wench, the professor screamed. When I say all ahead, full or full speed ahead, or any sort of nautical term, you say aye, Captain. No, Hench Gerald turned up her nose. You will do as I say. The professor walked up to Hench Gerald and glared up at her. Make me. Hench Gerald glared down. All right, I will. The professor nodded. Mr. Black, let me borrow your personal defense device. I am staying out of this. Harry began backing away from his two squabbling friends. Give it to him, Hench Gerald shrugged. Little shrimp's gonna need all the help he can get. By now, Harry walked out of the room as fast as he could. Hench Gerald walked over to the door and stuck her head out. He's gone? Excellent. The professor nodded. Now it's time to discuss that thing that we do not wish him to know that we are discussing, because it would ruin the surprise. He's not here. Hench Gerald blinked. So you don't have to be evasive. Oh, the professor blinked. Right. The odd couple asked me to come down here and tell you that we've arrived on the island. The doctor stuck her head through Harry's doorway. Thanks, Harry yawned. I'll be right out. Been busy. The doctor glanced around the small cabin, paying particular attention to the piles of books and scrolls. Yeah, Harry nodded. I've been researching every ward I could find. Some of the Egyptian ones are really nasty. Gonna put them up. The doctor raised her eyebrow. I'm thinking about it. Harry nodded. Depends on if I can find a way to make all the wards work together. Good luck then. The doctor shrugged. This wasn't really her area of expertise. Thanks. Harry put on his jacket. Let's go. Right behind you. The doctor smirked. Harry walked out of his room and into the professor. I see that the doctor told you that we've arrived. Yes, Harry nodded. I've also been doing some research on wards. I think I've figured out a way to get all of these to work together. Let me see that, please. The professor held out his hand. Yes, it looks like you've been able to work everything out. Will it work with the wards that you've been developing? Harry blinked. Or the wards that the architect has put up? They should work. The professor squinted at Harry's notes. Give me a minute. All right. Harry watched as the professor made several additional notes. Hench Gerald, take a look at this. The professor bellowed. Not so loud. Hench Gerald glared. I am standing right here. Take a look at this. The professor handed Hench Gerald the notes. Tell me what you think. They should work. Hench Gerald gave a slow nod. I'd like to get the architect's opinion before we start everything, though. I'd appreciate that. Harry nodded. I'm always happy to get a second, third, or even 15th opinion. Do you mind if I add a few of my family's wards? The doctor cut in. I'm also going to want to add a few things to the hospital. Consult with the architect, the professor suggested. He's the expert with wards. You might also want to look over his hospital designs. Thanks, the doctor nodded. I'll do that. This way, the professor gestured. The architect put in a dock for the Zeppelin so we won't be porting down. Cool. Harry shrugged. The group walked towards the nose of the Zeppelin and emerged on a large raised stone platform. Glad you could make it, the architect smiled. We've just finished the foundation and we're ready to lay the cornerstone. Great, Harry nodded. I assume we're going to tie the wards to the cornerstone? Yes, the architect nodded. The first few layers anyway. There are several fingers of rock jutting out of the ocean around the island. My current plan is to erect several towers on these fingers of rock to extend the reach of the wards and to put in a few more layers. Sounds good, Harry nodded. Could you take a look at these notes? I think we've managed to get all these wards to work together, but I'd still appreciate your opinion. Let me look at that. The architect nodded. Do you mind if I make a few changes, please? Harry nodded. All of these will work with the goblin wards that I'm planning to erect. The architect made a few notes, but I think you can tighten them up if you make these changes. It also closes a small gap you left here. I see, Harry nodded. Thanks. When do we start to make things as effective as possible? You're going to have to start casting the second the stone falls into its final position, and you won't be able to stop until all these wards are placed. I'm not sure I have that much energy, Harry admitted with a frown. I'll do my best, but we've already taken care of that. The doctor smiled. Over the past 2 weeks, Henschgerl and I have been brewing a few potions to take care of that little problem. The minus side of that is that you won't be able to cast more than the most basic spells for about a day after the casting. That's fine. Harry took a breath. Show us the way, I'll give you the tour. The architect smiled. To start with, this is not the Zeppelin's permanent berth. We've incorporated a dock in the main building's final design. Excellent. The professor nodded. This way. The architect led the group down a narrow path. To our left is some temporary housing for the workers and for the people you've sent us. What people? Harry raised an eyebrow. Several Yuki honor. The architect smiled. They're a godsend. Without them we wouldn't have had a chance to get so far along. They've managed to keep the worst storms away. With them around there is no chance that we'll miss a day because of the weather. I'm glad they're working out. Harry nodded. So they're happy here? Oh yes. The architect nodded. Tremendously happy. Good. Harry smiled. I'm glad. And here we come to the building site. The architect smiled. Wow. Harry stared down at the large pit. Why did you dig so deep? I wanted to put in a few underground levels, the architect replied proudly. And I guess I got carried away. Eventually I hope to have tunnels and vaults under every square inch of this island. It's enough to keep me busy for years. Great. Harry shrugged. Where's the cornerstone that's it right behind you? The architect's grin nearly split his face. That is the cornerstone. Harry's eyes widened as he took in the 50-ton rectangular arc. It's bigger than the house I grew up in. Megalithic construction is the only way to go. The architect smirked. When it's finished you won't be able to fit a razor blade through the seams. It is more difficult than normal methods, but it will last forever and it's much stronger. How are you going to get it in place? Harry couldn't believe it was possible to build anything with things that big. It's already been heavily enchanted to allow me to do this myself. The architect smiled. It took 3 teams of goblins 2 weeks to get it right. Construction will speed up after this when I bring in the machinery and allow the construction teams to do their jobs. Why didn't you have them help you with this? Harry couldn't tear his eyes away from the giant stone. It's traditional for the builder to set the first stone. The architect shrugged. Who knows if that tradition is there for a reason? Better safe than sorry, and it gives you a bit of the glory right off. Harry smiled. Okay, let's do this. All right. The architect began chanting under his breath in an unrecognizable language. It's moving, Henschgerl cried out. A line of sweat made its way down the architect's forehead as the massive stone took flight. Be ready. I can't hold this up much longer. I am ready. Harry drew his wand. Harry began casting the second the giant stone made contact with the ground. For hours he kept up the pace, allowing himself only enough time to down one of the doctor's potions every time his reserves began to get too low. Rivers of sweat poured down Harry's face and neck as he cast words that hadn't been used in generations, in dead languages that hadn't touched a human tongue in just as long. He's starting to tire, the doctor cried out. Watch him, he's almost done. The professor checked the notes. Just one more layer to add. Clap to Verida. Harry's voice was hoarse as the last word snapped into place. I'm done. How do they look? Magnificent. The architect smiled. Alone they would withstand an assault more powerful than had been seen on this world. When we finish adding the goblin charms they'll be impenetrable. Try not to let anyone hear that. Harry felt faint. Unsinkable ships tend to come to a bad end. As you say, the architect nodded. I'm afraid that we haven't been entirely honest with you when we told you that we brought you here to complete the wards. Oh, Harry raised an eyebrow. Yes, the architect nodded. We had another, more sinister reason to bring you here today. It was all Henschgerl's idea. The professor smirked evilly. Happy birthday, Henschgerl screamed. What? Harry blinked. Happy birthday, Henschgerl repeated herself. Orky will be here with the cake in a few minutes. I hate to say it, Harry gave a sheepish smile. But my birthday was about a month ago, and we didn't have a party. Henschel nodded. So we're having one now. It's more of a surprise that way. Oh, Harry scratched his chin. I guess that makes sense. How do you normally spend your birthday? Henschel was bouncing with excitement. Well, Harry sighed. I'll usually spend it alone. In the past few years I've had a few letters. You've never had a party? Henschel's lip started to quiver. I've had a party, Harry smiled. It was great, just one. Henschel's eyes started watering. I had two sort of. Harry frowned. Does it count as a party if there's only one other person that doesn't hate your guts? Oh, and there was some cake too. You're having a party every year from now on. Henschel's hands balled up into fists and she thrust them in her pockets. Here with us, okay? Harry nodded. I got the cake. Oyuki smiled. I'll transfigure some chairs and a table, the professor volunteered. Harry blanched at Henschel's glare. Just stand around and enjoy my birthday. That's right. Henschel nodded. What kind of cake is that? Oyuki? It's a baked Alaska. Oyuki smiled. What else? So this is what it's like to have a family, Harry mused to himself as he ate his portion of cake. Have you given any thought of what you're going to do with your Nundu? The doctor smiled across the table. No, Harry shook his head. Why, I was hoping that he'd be willing to leave it here. The doctor smiled. I've decided to stay so I can personally oversee the construction of my hospital, and I'd like to keep the Nundu around so I can continue my research. Is there a place to keep it around here? Harry looked around. I had the workers construct something temporary while you were putting the wards up. The architect nodded. Temporary in the sense that it'll only last a few hundred years. Oyuki giggled. The houses he put up to house us are quite shoddy. A few good hurricanes and a dozen earthquakes and they'd fall to the ground. I told you that you'll be getting more permanent quarters in the fortress when I have that built, the architect groused. You only need to wait a few months. I'm just playing with you. Oyuki smiled. Anyone else would have considered what we have to be good enough. Oh, the architect turned back to his cake. What do you need to do in America? Harry turned towards the professor and Henschel. We have a convention we like to attend. The professor smiled. It shows all the newest advancements in magical law enforcement and military spells and equipment. Henschel smiled. Not to mention the strong civilian contingent. The professor nodded. The Americans are much more interested in dueling and lethal spells than most other groups of people. We're presenting a few things. Henschel smiled. Would you mind speaking a few words of introduction before we present? The professor smiled hopefully. Sure, Harry shrugged. If you think it would help. Harry missed his birthday by about a month ago. Story time. He missed it. I wouldn't think he'd pay too much attention to it without his friends around, and since he'd spent his entire life without really celebrating it. The return to England is coming up. Stay tuned.